Hi, and welcome to Macroeconomics, Chapter 19, Macroeconomic Policy Around the World. I've pulled myself off camera today because we're having a little glitching issue, and so I thought that might be distracting. But I wanted to let you know that we're going to be talking about diversity of countries and economies across the world. We'll be looking at growth policies for countries seeking to improve standards of living. We'll understand some factors that cause unemployment, some things that cause inflation, and then concerns over possible negative consequences of free trade. So this graph or this table shows you in 2011 what would be considered low income, under 1,025 a year, about 12% of the world's population living that way then. Middle income earning 1,000 to 12,475. That's about 70% of the population, the vast majority. And then high income individuals earning over 12,500 a year, almost but not quite 19%. If you want a little more updated information, please click the link here. You can pause the video and encourage you to always check what is true today to see how the world has changed in just a few years. These two pie charts show you where the wealth of the world is and the number of people who kind of possess that wealth, if you will. So this is population by a country's income. This is the wealth of those countries. So the lowest 19% of countries have less than 1% of all of the world's kind of wealth or economy for the year, gross domestic or gross national international product. High income countries, which are 12% of the countries, have almost 70% of the income. And then the lion's share of people live in countries in that middle group in 2011, 1,000 to like 12,500 income per person. And those 70% have about 31% of the world's economy. You can see it broken out by countries and incomes, those between 34,000 and up. Dark purple, places like Australia, Europe, North America, Japan. You can see lower income countries spread throughout parts of Southeast and Asia and other parts of Asia, pieces of the Africa and continent, and South and Latin America. So again, encourage you to look up how that may have shifted because some countries have been growing during the last 10 years. The Asian tigers are an example of countries that were once underdeveloped that have been able to grow pretty substantially their economy. South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore are three good examples, having place in the international community, trading in electronics, and doing well in the growth of their economies. And you see three reasons listed here: supporting heavy investment in the people, support of innovative companies, and freedom for market forces to take effect. I'd like to throw a left-right hook at you, kind of a three-punch combination, thinking of these three things. Now, this graph shows some of the lower standard of living countries in Africa where there has been slow growth, and you'll note in the bottom that the book talks about political factionalism, infighting corruption as part of the source. I want to let you know that I think that is a true part of the story in many cases, but it is not the full story. The truth is that there are other factors from outside, and the rest of the world has a place to play in this conversation. So it turns out that we influence many other governments and how well they can do both politically but also economically. The same way we're concerned about countries getting involved in our politics, we do the same around the world. And we're not the only ones. Many countries do that. But these countries may have limited capital inflows from the rest of the world, little investment from the rest of the world. China's starting to change some of this. Debt that may be building in those countries. And many times we offer aid that creates disincentive, or we, as a national community, provide loans that can put pressure on the economies for growth down the road in order to address critical issues today. And so debt and aid support have hindered what development might look like. We've closed countries from international markets. We've banned trade from certain countries or to certain countries, depriving their economies of things they need to be healthy and to grow. And by we, I don't keep meaning just the US. I mean the developed world. We attract and we take in strong talent from these countries, and that talent stays and works in our country and doesn't go back to help develop their own national economy. So I think there's a fuller picture that explains what's going on. I can tell you I've been in 3 different countries where I've worked in dumps where people live and their kids play day in and day out. It's heartbreaking, and it's hard to believe that we allow people to live that way. We've been making incredible strides in addressing poverty, and it has been remarkable to see the change in my adult life. We've continued to see the poverty rates decrease and desperate poverty to be beginning to be really well addressed. I'm concerned, and as are many, this pandemic seems to have pushed those efforts back by the World Bank and the international community by 5 to 10 years. And that means real pain in the lives of real people. So, what are some of the causes of unemployment around the world? Recessions that lead to a downturn in the economy, and what should we do about them? So, Keynesian solution, when there is a reduction, is both expansionary fiscal and monetary policy, and those are listed down below in those charts in case you've forgotten what they are, but they may be lowering interest rates to try and create more loans and movement of money. They may be, in terms of the Fed and the federal government, the Federal Reserve may be doing the interest rates, the federal government may be choosing to increase spending and therefore do deficit spending or raise the national debt level. Classical solutions talk more about reducing government regulation, supporting entrepreneurship, and growing through new business opportunities, even new products, new industries. And I can tell you Keynesian works well in the short term and classical works better in the long term. And that's exactly what each of those, if you remember back to Keynesian and neoclassical chapters, we said they were good for. So causes of unemployment in developing and developed nations, we look at the natural rate of unemployment. So when we look at the natural rate of unemployment, we're looking at frictional and structural unemployment. Frictional, where people are moving; structural, that comes from changes in the structure of the economy or the institutions of a country. And so as technology advances, the skills of a workforce may not be matched by the skills needed by employers. And so the population isn't ready to adapt to the new kinds of work. Changes in institutions in a country as certain kinds of work is moved out of country for cost savings or to expand the ability to sell in other parts of the world. And so I don't buy into this one quite as much because as we've seen jobs move offshore, there's been a lot of other jobs created in the service sector here in the United States, for example. And as we pay more and more for skilled workers, they spend that money, we spend that money, and we help create other jobs. So Some of the needs and solutions for developing nations would be things like access to world markets and access to current and new technology, infrastructure that can move goods and services around well, workforce readiness, so workers who are ready to work in this environment and understand this technology and have the skill set necessary to thrive. The rule of law and that law being enforced, so we understand the rules that we'll be asked to commit to and operate by, and everyone will be expected to operate by similar laws. And the influence by the rich and powerful around us is going to weigh into all that is going on in building health as we try to develop an economy. Unemployment in low and middle income countries, uh, you will find more people with less consistent wage payment. They might be working for a season and then off. They could be self-employed, and so that's not counted. They could be day laborers who work during planting or harvesting season, but other parts of the year have difficulty finding work. There's often not enough producers, and so we talk about why that might be if the cost of labor is low, and that's when we see things like sweatshops talked about in our book. I will say sweatshops, we have to look and say, sometimes they're creating the best jobs they can, and we just label them as sweatshops. Sometimes they're really abusive to their people, which I think is never there's never a reason to be that for that to be acceptable. But I do recognize that in some places, in order to run a viable business that can be sustained, you have to pay people less than what you would like to, but that's better than the other options they have had. And I've seen that in India. I've seen that in many parts of the world Indonesia, places that I've had opportunity to travel. Um, and so I think we have to be careful that when we judge what a company is doing, we understand the intricacies because they may be doing the best they can at that point in time and trying to treat their people as well as they can, but the pay seems very low to us, but it's better than other options or other employers. Lack of human capital is another issue. And so there may be, again, lacking skill training, and that makes them less productive. And you see my idea on the idea of um, fishing. We don't just teach someone to fish. We need to also provide them with modern equipment, ships versus nets, fish farms, and packing facilities, and access to distribution and commercial shipping, etc., if we really want to help an economy grow. So inflation is caused sometimes by supply shocks. These are shortages, like maybe of a crop because of a particular weather pattern that happened. It could be disruption in supply chains, as has happened during 2020, 2021 with the pandemic. And it could be demand driven with lots of money in the hands of individuals and businesses. Maybe money is cheap with low interest rates. Maybe there's been an expansion of the monetary supply. And so we see prices rising because there's a lot of money out there and not a lot of goods or new goods to pursue with it. And then large government deficits and debt can lead to the central bank printing money, which again increases that supply of money and creates pressure on increased prices, not always hyperinflation. Here are some examples, though, of significant high inflation. And I saw Zimbabwe's with my work with Enactus during 2008, 2009. Venezuela is still going on today. So there's not a ton of examples, maybe 10 or 12 over the last 125 years, but one of them is happening right now. So there can be negative consequences to building your economy really quickly, which often happens with the inflow of capital from other parts of the world. If that capital suddenly determines that there's a better, less risky place to invest and they begin to pull it out, it can kind of whiplash your economy and it leads to what seemed like a great thing with free trade turning around and leaving you in a worse situation than when you started. And there's some examples of this in places like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. Greece has been in this situation 2 or 3 times in the last decade alone, between 2008 and 2021. They've kind of had to be rescued a few times by the EU. But there are also positive effects of free trade. Access to technology you wouldn't have, training you wouldn't have, healthcare that you might not have had, access to food that can be produced in quantities to um, sustain civilization in a way that it hasn't in the past. And so the famines that we have seen, that I've seen in my lifetime, they tend to be smaller and less long, and shorter lasting. And part of that is because of modern technology and trade and the recognition and the ability to communicate and learn from one another. So there's upsides and downsides, which is why we will often see protests at things like the World Trade Organization. Some people are hurt when you move a industry from one part of the world to another. While some people are gaining new jobs in that new location, people are losing jobs in that old location. So there's hardship. And as a result, we speak out about that and try to find ways to grow the pie, but also to share its growth. And um, I will continue to say that I believe that capitalism and free market economics is really good at growing the pie, but it takes humanity, it takes political thought, it takes culture of ethics to distribute it in a way that's more humane and fair to all. So one of your exercise for this time is that should there be free movement, to think about should there be free movement of people across boundaries, country borders, as part of free trade. I had a student from the Republic of Georgia whose dad would illegally cross the border into Russia to sell dental equipment and supplies. That's where he could find work, but it was illegal for him to work there. This happens all over the world. And the question is, free trade really says goods and services can move freely, money can exchange freely, but it also should say movement of labor to where there's job and opportunity. And so I'm curious if you think that's a good idea. By the way, opinion is not enough. You must cite at least a couple reasons why, and you should have done some research to demonstrate some thoughtfulness about that. Um, so make sure that you tap into some of our, some online resources or some of our text-based resources to justify your opinion. Thanks.